Good evening, everyone. My name is Tamar. I work here at the museum at Beit Hatfutsot, and we are honored to have you all here with us today. The Museum of Beit Hatfutsot is a museum that tells stories, and tonight we are honored to have our own personal stories and Avram's personal story show how these stories link into a larger and greater story. The museum tells the unique and ongoing story of the Jewish people, and we're here tonight to remember and to mark Yom Zikaron מהשואה וכבד, the Remembrance Day, the Holocaust Remembrance Day, in a different way. This is the fourth year that we are having Zikaron BaSalon, literally remembering in the living room here at Beit Hatfutsot, in partnership with Hillel Israel, Hillel Tel Aviv University. And Hillel is the largest organization, the Jewish student organization worldwide, running programs relating to the Jewish people. I just want to mention that we are honored to have Avraham Ruth here with us tonight, which participated in the program Generation to Generation, G2G, a program held by Beit Hatfutsot, the Ministry of Education, and the Ministry of Equality Rights. Avram, I think we can start.
Good evening. My name is Avraham Ruth, not Ruth. And I came here tonight at the invitation of the Beit Hatfutsot, of the Diaspora House, which I know already for many years, since the beginning of it actually, and to speak about the Shoah. To speak about the Shoah, all of us know there are 60 million Jews murdered. I belong to the Dutch Jews. And the Dutch Jews, there were, before the war in Holland, 120,000 Jews. And now, and out of that, about 80% were murdered by the Germans, mainly in Auschwitz, in Birkenau, in Ravensbrück, but also in Bergen-Belsen and Theresienstadt. In the story of mine, and therefore before I start the story, I would like to ask you to participate a little bit in the story. And I have a question for some of you, most of you, is who learned the first 6 years in the basic school in a public school? Can you hand up your hand who learned in a public school? Okay. And the second question I would, then I tell you why the reason I asked this, because my story started that in Holland, but I started before the war. Before the war in Holland, I went to school in 1934. I'm today almost 90 years old. So I started school in a public school. My parents came from Orthodox, liberal Jewish family. The Orthodox in Holland are very strict Orthodox. They follow exactly all the Jewish religious law, but they are very liberal. It's all in-house and in the synagogue, but it's not outside. They are very liberal for other people. My parents thought that when we were 6 children at home, 2 girls and 4 sons, and we also had an adopted child from Poland, which came as a refugee to Holland and was with us before and during the war. My parents always thought that we should go to a public school because we have to know the Dutch non-Jewish society, and we should be a part of the Dutch Jewish society, whereas they were still strictly Orthodox. The school where I went to was, as I said, a public school where about half of the children, it's more than half of the children, they were from Jewish parents. The other half were from non-Jewish parents. Also, about the half, that means a quarter of the children, were children who came as refugees from Germany, Jewish refugees from Germany, and came to Holland because they thought Holland was safe. In the school itself, we didn't went to school naturally on Saturday, and the school was very thoughtful. It was, as I said, a Dutch public school. The teachers were all non-Jewish. They were very thoughtful of the Jewish kids who didn't come on Shabbat to the school. So they gave special lessons like sport and like painting, which I very much enjoyed that they didn't have to paint. And there was there was a sort of I would say they would think about the Jews as equal and not to harm anything. All this, one of the specific things were the refugees, the Jewish refugees who came from Germany, and they fled from Hitler, and they thought that in Holland they would be safe. They were very much adapted as equal, and they learned very fast Dutch, which was at that time for us, and we thought it normal, but later on I understood it must have been very difficult for the children to learn very fast Dutch, because there is a difference between Dutch and German, especially in the way it's spoken. And then one of the child, to give you an idea, that is naturally Anne Frank, but I will come back to it later, who came also as a child, as a refugee to Holland and learned Dutch very fast, maybe better than many Dutch people themselves. So we went to this school and till 1940. In 1940 I finished the school, but at the same time there was the German invasion in Holland. The German invasion in Holland was completely surprise for the Dutch people, also for the Dutch Jewish people. And the reason that they never believed, because Holland was thought as a neutral state in the First World War. They saw Germany, which was very friendly with Holland, and the export from Holland to Germany was about 60%. They lived together, they worked together, and they never thought that the Germans would invade Holland. The invasion was very fast. Only in 5 days the Germans were able to conquer Holland, and mainly because about 10% of the Dutch people were members of the Nazi party already at that time, and they were traitors. Most of the land was betrayed by a Dutch Nazi in Holland. It's not well known, but the Dutch Nazi party in Holland was about 10% of the Dutch population at the outbreak of the war. Dat wil zeggen, there were more than 600,000 Nazi members in Holland. The government of Holland, who was in Holland, fled immediately. The Queen left for England, and the whole government left for England. They fled away, and it's against what happened in Belgium and in Norway and in Denmark. And the reason that much more Jews have been saved in Belgium, Norway, and Denmark is that the kings of this country stayed in the country, and they were a part of the civilian population who was against, now I'm looking for the right word in English, but Hidnagdut, for the resistance against the German laws and occupation. In Holland, Holland is a country where it's an extremely, till today, extremely lawful country. Everything, it's a country that exists already more than 400 years, which has a democratic life since 300 years, and everything goes according to the law and very strict to the law. And the people follow the law, and that's one of the reasons. Who of you have been in Holland, in Amsterdam? I know, I see quite a lot of you. So you all have seen the big windows and the open windows. People show, they are not afraid to show what's going into home. It's not a secret. And the second thing is naturally that the neighbors themselves watch what's happening with the other neighbors. They very well know in the street exactly what knows their neighbor and what knows their neighbor. This is important later when I will talk about the hiding of Jews by non-Jews. So because they lived, the existing government, the director generals of the ministers and so on, who stayed in who stayed after the occupation of the Germans. The Germans left them in their job, and as a result, therefore, they followed exactly the German rules. The German told them what to do and how to do, and the Dutch officials they followed their instructions very much, and even some of them more than that. They even sometimes tried even to do it before. This brought Holland to a situation where all the laws were made against the Jews and found very little opposition. Dutch underground almost didn't exist. It started a little bit in the later years of the war, after 42 or later that, but there was no organized Dutch underground. When the war started, in 40, I started to go personally. As I said, that life was still going on. And from 41, I went to a Jewish school because we were not allowed anymore to go to any public school. And anyhow, my sisters who were elder than me and my brother went already to Jewish school from the public school. They went on to Jewish high school. So I went to a type of school for Jewish students, which was not very successful. And in 41, the second part of 41, I joined the Dutch Jewish high school. You will ask me, how is it possible that there were still Jews? But the Jews tried to keep to normal life as far as possible. And the redifa, what? The persecution of the Jews went on very slowly and in a very long process. It started with confiscating bicycles. Everybody who's been in Amsterdam knows that bicycles is the main mean of transport. And then it started with money. It started with that you're not allowed to go into shops, not in order to buy. And it started very slowly. Also in 41, we started to wear the Star of David, the yellow Star of David. And here I must say, against what many other happened in other countries, we in Holland, my sister, brothers, we never felt offended by wearing a Jewish star. We were very proud Jews. We were taught to be very proud Jews in Holland. And also when we were wearing the Star of David, there was never any anti-Semitism from the crowd around us. So that was, in that respect, in Holland, it was not a problem for us. We started to go to school, and then started in 42 that the Germans started their actions for destroying the Jewish community and for sending them to camps and so on, started razzias. There was a little resistance from Holland, from Dutch, mainly Dutch workers in Amsterdam against the persecution of Jews, but it was very quickly put down. And since then, the Germans had no problem with the Jewish persecution. We went to school, then we used to live in south of Amsterdam, which is a very good neighborhood. And on 41, my grandmother died already in 37, and my grandfather was living alone. He was head of the Jewish community in Amsterdam, the Jewish Orthodox community in Amsterdam. And he was also head of the synagogue where today is the Jewish Museum. And he lived on one of the canals, one of the grachten, one of the best grachten of Holland, and he had a whole house there. So my parents decided that he could not live alone during the war, and we moved from South Amsterdam to the house of my grandfather. And the house of my grandfather was exactly opposite, but outside the ghetto. And that made it, and that is one of the reasons my life was safe, because when there were razzias in the ghetto, we were just outside it. Now, as I said, we went to school, and school days, you cannot call it school, but it was very, one day we would go to the class, and next day a child would be missing, a teacher would not coming, and we never knew what happened. If they went into hiding, if they were caught by the Germans, and so on. Also, various times, at that time there came, we ran out of the school and ran away because it was told that the Germans would come to have a razzia. So it was a very strange school year which we had there, but we still tried to live normal. Together in the same school earlier, there were two schools. There was the Jewish high school, and as I mentioned, at that time I was Orthodox, so it was an Orthodox Jewish high school. On the other side was a lycée, what we called, it was the school where I learned Anna Frank. We had together the playground, and we were together in the same area. Although I do not mention Anna Frank, I do not remember her personally, but it was in the same time, they had the same time of problems that we had. And when we ran away, they ran away, and when their teachers were taken, and the children. So you can imagine, all of you, that when you go to school and in the middle of a class somebody disappears and you don't know some of your friends or classmates and you don't know where they are and how they are, it's a very difficult situation, and it has also naturally a deep influence, not only on the studies and so on, but also on the person itself. All this hate made a deep impression, and we learned very little at school, by the way, because you had no head to learn, and also the teachers changed, or they were left, and it was a very strange period. During this period, it changed in 43. In 43, all the Jews from Amsterdam were forced into ghettos, one in the east of Amsterdam, one in the center of Amsterdam, and we were forced to leave our house and driven to a ghetto, a small Jewish ghetto in the east of Amsterdam. Because we were a big family, 7 of us, we got 2 small, very small flats, and in one flat was my grandfather and 2 sisters, and in one flat my mother and father, and we 4 brothers. In the night in September 43 came the Germans and held a razzia to make Amsterdam Judenfrei, without any Jews, and to finish the Jewish problem of Amsterdam. At that time, they also came to, and they emptied the whole ghetto. They also came to our house and to the house of my sister and grandfather, which was one next to another. They took my grandfather and my 2 sisters to Weijen and camp in Holland in the name of Westerbork. They sent them to, my sister to Ravensburg. My grandfather was immediately gassed in Auschwitz. It happened that the Germans, by the way, it was Dutch police. Everything was done by Dutch police. There were almost no German police. It all was police from Amsterdam. And they also came to our house, but somewhere my mother said that we were sick and we couldn't go, and she shouted at them that she doesn't want to see them and closed the door. And for a reason we do not know till today, we were able to stay in the house the same night. It's obvious, I will later come back to the story of my sisters. At that time, they had already contact, which my parents had contact with the Dutch underground, and there were many people from Holland went into hiding. The reason that our family didn't went into hiding was that my 2 sisters, they were religious, and did not agree to go to non-Jewish families where there was where they wouldn't know the treatment and wouldn't know the food and anything. So they forced, I mean, they convinced my parents to stay till the end, as they didn't want to go into foreign hands. Later, so this is my two sisters, they were taken, as I said, to Ravensburg. One sister lived there for about half a year. My second sister, and died then from a sickness. And then my second sister, she was able to live 1 week after the war, after the Russians freed Auschwitz. But then she wrote us even some cards in which she said she stayed alive because of the family life in our family, the meals at the Friday evening and so on. And but she died the same day. She wrote these cards 1 week later. We sank from exhaustion and so on. What happened to the Dutch Jews generally? So I mentioned the hiding. We went into hiding, but the hiding to understand what happened in Holland. So there are some thousands of Dutch non-Jews who took Jews in hiding, who were Chasidei Olam, who were world
righteous among the nations.
what?
Righteous among the nations.
Righteous of the world, but the about 20,000 Jews who went into hiding, about 15,000, that means by more than 3/4 of the Jews, were caught and left. Some by the families who hid them, and they had no money to pay them, so they sent them to the street. Many of them because they were betrayed by Dutch police or by neighbors. And the story of the hiding of Jews in Amsterdam is very similar to the story of Anne Frank, where, you know, she went in hiding, and the Dutch and the Dutch claim till today that they don't know who betrayed them, but that's a story I have heard from the main historian in Amsterdam who knows the story of the Jews, and Anne Frank is an expert on Anne Frank, and they says they know exactly, but they don't want to publish it because it's not good for the for the Dutch image. And then to make an intermediate about the story of Anne Frank, because I imagine that most of you have read their book and their story. So the story of Anne Frank is not a nice story. It's the Dutch made it their story, but originally, when Anne Frank, her father, whom I also met personally, came to Holland, they didn't want to get him into the border, and he had to cross the border illegally with his family. He established, and he was able to establish a business in Holland, and finally they were betrayed and went to Bergen-Belsen. So Anne Frank had never the Dutch nationality. And after the war, my parents, who were hidden by Polish coal workers, not Dutch, who were paid a lot of money in order to keep them at the home, at the roof, at a small room during the last year of the war. They went to Maastricht, which is a city in the south of Holland, and started to rearrange the Jewish community life in Holland. And as one of them came back, the first survivors from Bergen-Belsen. The survivors from Bergen-Belsen who were from Holland, they were let in. The survivors who came from Bergen-Belsen and had no Dutch, who were from Holland but had no Dutch passports, they had no German or no passports at all, they were put in a camp together with Nazis, and it took a lot of time and efforts from my father, from the head of a school in Maastricht, to get them out and to get them free. And this is, and that's what brings me back now to the story itself. So as I was hidden, and my brothers were hidden, so I have two brothers who were hidden in the north of Holland, and who had foster parents who were excellent. They never accepted a penny. They did it out of conviction, and some of them out of Christian conviction. And but they were kept at home, and they went. They had really a normal, I would say, good life. And my third brother had much less mother luck, and he was he hit with a Dutch, big Dutch black dealer who dealt in all type of illegal goods, and he kept him only because he wanted, after the war, he was afraid that they would take him to court, and he thought if he takes a Jewish child, that will keep him from being court-martialed. It didn't help him much. He was court-martialed for 3 years, but at least it saved my brother's life. I myself am the typical story of Dutch children. When he went into hiding, I went to various families, and every time after a month or two, they were betrayed, the families were state were betrayed, so they had to find another address for me. And so I went in about, they say, in about 12 or 13 different addresses where I was hidden by families, because every time the families got after a short time afraid, and I had to move from their places. The other thing about which we ask ourselves, and there is no answer till today, is how is it possible that Jews from Germany and Dutch Jews of Germany who had seen the Nazi campaigns in Germany came to Holland. About 40,000 German Jews came to Holland before the war from Germany. And they lived in Holland, and they believed, the same as the Dutch Jews in Holland, that the Germans would never come to Holland. And even most of them were not able to flee when the Germans invaded Holland, because the whole invasion took only 5 days, and was very difficult to get out of Holland. So the question I ask myself till today, naturally, is how is it that my parents never understood from the beginning, when there might have been a possibility to flee, or even before the war, why they never thought that this would be our our destiny, that this would be our destiny. This is one of the things we don't understand. There have been many publications about it, many research, but there is no explanation why we never understood, even in the war itself, that we were in danger of being killed by the Germans, especially when they started the transports to Poland. Now I want to speak a little bit more about the Dutch people during the war. As I mentioned, there were a few thousand, maybe 5, maybe 10, maybe 20,000 Dutch people who risked their life, and some of them were really killed by hiding Jews. But the rest of the Dutch people were or neutral or anti-Jewish. The establishment, the queen who went to England, only the first time she mentioned on the radio, and there was regular radio from England, that the Jews were being killed in East Europe, was in 1943, after the last Jew was sent out of Holland. And this is something which has never been forgiven to them. But this is only one sign how the Dutch establishment cooperated with the German Nazis, being it passive or being it active. The Dutch police, the strange thing about it is that the Dutch, for example, when I gave them one of the things, my father was the head of a committee and regent and was trustee of the Dutch Jewish boys to be, no, I'm sorry. Orphans of the Dutch Jewish orphans, orphan house in Amsterdam. They lived there about 80 or 90 boys with the whole staff and so on, and it was on the other side in the ghetto, but on the other side of our house. My father was the trustee there, and he went there regular. Sometimes he went there on Friday evening for a Friday evening prayer. And suddenly the Germans decided to eliminate the house. But the Germans may have decided it, but they thought that even the police in Amsterdam is not trusty enough, and they brought a complete corps of Dutch policemen from Hague to Amsterdam to eliminate this house, to take the boys on trucks and send them with Dutch trains to Auschwitz. The thing is that when the Jews were caught, sometimes they were put on electrical trams in Amsterdam. I think most of you have seen these electrical trams. The railways, the Dutch railways always sent, and also the Dutch trams, sent invoices to the Germans for every Jew they carried out to the central concentration camp in Holland and from Westerbork to Auschwitz. So we find today many invoices of the Dutch people who for transporting Jews to Auschwitz. And these were Dutch train leaders, these were Dutch people. So the story that Holland was very good for the Jews during the war is a story which is absolutely not correct. As I said, there is always a minority who is who goes against the majority, but the majority of Dutch people or cooperated, or at least were passive to the fate of the Jews in Holland. And now, with your allowance, I will go one moment. I will go to what happened after the war. And after the war, when Jews came back, I mentioned before, for German Jews who came from Germany to Holland, that they were very badly treated. And as I said, like Anna Frank, if she would have come back to Holland, she would have been treated as an enemy of the country because she was from Germany, and it would have taken time to get her re-established as a citizen. After the war, the same Dutch establishment stayed, and the Dutch government had the opinion that if you give special care to the Jews, or you return all their properties, or you treat the Jews in a special way, then you create anti-Semitism. And so it took about 10 years before the first reparations were made in Holland. Now you can imagine people came back after the war from concentration camps, from hiding, had no money, had no way of living, and all their living accounts, whatever they had, were stolen by the Germans and not given back by the Dutch people. This made it a very difficult period for the Dutch Jews till the 50s. Later, only they started to return houses and other properties in Holland in the 50s. But here too we have a very strange, typical Dutch thing. Houses in Holland were confiscated, in Amsterdam especially, were confiscated by the Germans. All the furniture, everything was sent to Germany under the slogan van we Germany, we are bombed out by the Allied, and all the people who have been bombed out need furniture and clothes, so they sent everything to Germany to be divided for the German people. So the people who came back had nothing, and then when they got back the houses, they were required by the Dutch council to pay the taxes, because the Germans who lived in these houses, or the Nazis who lived in houses during the war, didn't pay any taxes. So came the Dutch City Council and told them, before you get the houses, you have to pay the taxes, which you didn't get which you didn't pay when you were in camps or in hiding. Only last year, about 2 years ago, this became an official scandal in Holland itself, and the Dutch city council decided to pay 10 million euro as compensation for Jewish goals in Amsterdam. And there is still a fight between everybody there who will get the money, but that's another story. That's a typical Jewish story, or typical Jewish Holland story. There is still one thing more. About 15 years ago, or 17 years ago, as you know, there was found much gold in Switzerland, gold which was stolen from Jews in Europe and from governments in Europe. The Dutch government immediately in 1997 appointed a committee to see how much gold from the Dutch was stolen and found in Switzerland. But then after a few months they found out that a part of the gold, it came from golden teeth which were taken out from the dead people in Auschwitz and melted and sent to Swiss for getting money to keep on the war. So they decided they don't want the money, and they gave the money, they returned the money, and some of the money was given to Jewish institutions later on. But then it came out at the same time that the Dutch banks and the Dutch government and the Dutch exchange boards, they kept millions and millions of money from Jews which they had not returned. And you must, it was also very, because you must understand, if from the 85% of the Dutch Jews who were killed, many of them were left without any people, any family or so on. So there was a lot of money which was hidden by the Dutch people. They didn't want to return it. We organized as a group of, a small group of the Dutch Jews here in Israel and a small group of Dutch Jews in Holland. And we had we organized it there. We had a big fight with the Dutch government. And we were worried at that time that it would bring anti-Semitism because the Jews again want money. And what happened actually is that the Dutch press supported at that time, and must not forget that they supported totally the Jewish claims, our claims, and we have been paid at that time 400 million euros, which 80% has been paid to the Holocaust survivors and 20% to organizations who take care of Holocaust survivors in Israel and in Holland. But what is interesting about this, that against what everybody thought, there have been more publications and more research about the Dutch Jews history, the fate in the Second World War than has been ever before. The last thing, and I can go on talk a lot about it, it's very difficult for me, but I want to tell you that I only agreed to come here tonight, and I'm very honored by your listening and by your coming here, because my granddaughter has a program in school which says, how you call it in English, I don't know. What?
G to G, generation to generation.
Generation to generation, and it's organized by the House of Diaspora, and I agreed to participate. From somewhere, they got the news that I have been a Holocaust survivor, and the teacher, who is really very capable and very good, she convinced here the Beit Hatfutsot to invite me for this talk, and because of her, I couldn't say no. But normally I don't come much with my personal story because I don't like it. And there is another thing I want to tell you. You listen now to my story. But another question which we have, you would ask me, I never talked about it with my sons. My parents never talked about the Second World War, never. And I have never talked with my parents about what happened in the Second World War, how they thought, how they survived, what they did, how they felt. And you can imagine how difficult it was for my parents to lose two girls from 16 and 18 years. And we never discussed this at home. This is one of the things that the Holocaust survivors do not tell their stories, or very difficult for them to tell the stories, which includes myself. And what is the reason here for is also very difficult to explain. I think a part of it is, and that's the reason I asked you before who went to public school. You must imagine, I went to public school. I was totally free in a democratic country. We never met till 1940 any anti-Semitism. There was no anti-Semitism. We were free. We played soccer. We were members of soccer clubs. We played volleyball. We played every game possible. We went to swimming pool. We were totally free in a free society, in a free democratic society, where we lived as a Jew and known and felt as a Jew, but were never anything, because we were Jews, had never any obstacle in our life. And then suddenly in 40, we get this terrible German occupation, and the whole public, the Dutch public, the whole thing, suddenly they take distance from us. Suddenly we are a separate group, we are Jews, we are separate, and a part of it is something which we feel so bad about, because you feel that you are free and a member of a country, in this case Holland, and suddenly you are an outsider. You do not belong to this country. They throw you out of the country, and they try to kill you. This is an experience which is very difficult to explain mentally, very difficult to explain at all. And you will see that it's not only me, it's many of the Holocaust survivors have a problem how to explain. I have a problem to explain how my parents didn't understood that we should have left, and we had the possibility to leave Holland before the war. And all these things makes it very difficult to share with you the personal story. But as I said, I'm very much honored that on this Shoah Day you come here and take the time to listen to the story of an old man who tells you about the Shoah.
נראה לי ששני מיקרופונים זה יותר מדי.
בסדר, אני חביתי.
Avraham, first of all, thank you very, very much, Avraham, for sharing your story. We're going to take some questions, and maybe we can ask some personal questions and see some stories. I'm just going to say that afterwards we're going to split, whoever wants to stay, we're going to split into small discussion groups led by volunteers and students of Hillel. So we can take, Avraham, can you maybe tell us a bit about how long were you hiding in this family's house, and how was it that you every time changed families? And look, can you hear?
Yes,
Well, I'm asking Avraham to tell a bit more about the hiding experience. How do you find families? How do you move from house to house? How does that feel? And how did you find your parents at the end?
The hiding, there was, first of all, mainly we went from address to address. It was very difficult. Every countryside had a different people who did the hiding. Some of it were students. Many of them were dominers and pastors of the Catholic and the Protestant church. And I myself, as I said, they found addresses. They always found addresses, and they sent us from one address to another. Mostly we went alone from one address to another. Sometimes some of the students or other people came with us. But as I said, it was we were constantly in hiding, because constantly there was betrayal.
Yes.
I was curious, as you saw things progress, and I know that you were very young at the time, and you saw the persecution increase, Did you see possibly more of a division between the secular Jews and the religious?
No, there was no. Maybe everybody heard the question. Okay, there was no difference between the Jews, between religious and non-religious Jews. There was no diversity between the Jews. There was a certain diversity from some very small minority who said you should go in hiding or you should put resistance and not cooperate with the Germans, and there was a majority who belonged to what they call the Yotzerat, the Jewish committee, who cooperated with the Germans in this matter. But there was no diversity among the Jews themselves, not that I know of. And also I've read a lot of history and books. There was no diversity. It was one goral.
One fate.
What?
One fate.
One fate for everybody. So I don't think there was I don't think so. By the way, I would like to tell you that there is here a good friend of mine who came to hear my story, and that's Margalit Shacham. She herself is a child survivor, and from Holland, but she has asked me. She doesn't like to speak, and I promised her not to ask her to speak.
Yes.
How do you came to Israel?
The question is, how did
Okay.
you come and when did you come to
Okay,
Israel?
it's a very good question, because I would like to tell you, I came in Israel in '46, immediately after the war. And my family was Zionist. They were Zionist also before the war. And immediately, when the war was finished, I decided I don't want to stay in Holland any day. So, but because at that time you need special visas, special certificates to come to Israel, I went to a small place called Deventer, where they had Hachshara for Chalutzim, for pioneers. I went there for about 4 or 5 months, and then my parents were able to get for me a certificate, and in March '46, so that is quite a few years ago, I came to Israel. And then in Israel I was very lucky. I was able to be 1.5 years, I went to school in Mikveh Israel, what helped me very much to learn Ivrit. And then after that started the 48 war. I participated in the 48 war, in the well-known, what is called Gdut Regiment 13. And I was wounded during this war, and then started my life story. But I didn't came here to tell my life story, but this is the way it comes now. I was asked just a week ago by somebody from Yad Vashem who does some historical research, and what I feel about Holland. So I told him I have no feeling about Holland. I have no sentiments about Holland. I don't feel like a Dutch. If I come to Holland, and I come sometimes, but very lately, rarely, to Holland, I don't have any sentiments. It's not my country anymore. It's not my people anymore. And I'm very pleased to live here.
Thank you for calling it Israel and not Palestine.
I came to Palestine, that's the truth. At that time it was Palestine. I'm very much sorry for you. And I think you are making a mistake, because the history of Israel started. The history of Israel didn't start in '48. The story of Israel started in Palestine in 1890, when they founded Mikveh Israel. So I think I'm as proud that they came to Palestine as later we established the state, and now I'm a citizen of Israel, and that's naturally, I'm very happy about this.
I only say that because Israel has always existed.
I beg your pardon?
I only say that because in the mind of the world, Israel has not existed until 1948, but it's always been in existence. That's the only reason I say.
That's another story.
For another discussion. Any other questions? Yes, please.
What was the motivation of the Dutch people to hide you, and where did they hide you?
Did you hear,
They always
did anyone
hide
hear
it,
that question? The motivation of the Dutch families to hide, and where were you hiding?
The Dutch motivation was mainly, that was national, first of all national. The people who did it, they were very national, very Holland. Look, Dutch citizens are like citizens of any country. They were quite normal, these people. So they felt very wrong that the Dutch citizens, like I said before, that they were persecuted, and they felt Dutch, and they wanted to help Dutch people. They didn't always help us as Jews, but as Dutch citizens. The second reason is no doubt whatsoever that most of them had a deep Christian belief that they should save the Jews. And the third thing is, many times the people who were deep religious, when there was a pastor or a domine who was active in the community and who believed that they should save Jews, then his community would follow his advice. So you find villages in Holland where hundreds of children, mainly children, survived. And because also you must not forget that children is easier to hide than grown up. That answered your question.
Yes, and where were you hidden in those houses? I mean, where did they hide you?
Most of the Jews, sometimes I went outside. I had my hair, at that time I still had black hair. And I used hydroperoxide, if you know, to make my head red. So I was at that time a red time. The story when I went outside the house was told that during the war, in the first days of the war, the Germans bombed out Rotterdam. And the whole city of Rotterdam was destroyed. And thousands and thousands of children and people went all over the country. So they always told us that we are a child which was bombed out in Rotterdam, and they took us as a refugee. But a lot of children were hidden all the time in a house.
Did you ever meet the families again?
Yeah, I met some of the families, but most of them I didn't meet. But I met one of the last family I stayed with, which is a former family. But the problem of that family was they were very poor. They had, one cow and a lot of chickens and some swine. And after the war, they couldn't make the Dutch. The government was very bad for the Dutch farmers, and they left. They immediately left Holland, like most of the poor Dutch farmers at that time, and they went to partly to Canada, partly to Australia, and there was not more much contact. They only have one granddaughter who lives in Holland, and I met her about 2 years ago during the film we made at that time.
Can you tell us about the end of the war? How you left the family you stayed with and met your parents and met your family again?
At the end of the war, I somewhere heard from. First of all, we were
Avraham, that's your granddaughter, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So you see.
Hi, I'm not like the G2G granddaughter. I'm her older sister.
I am my granddaughter is in the army, so I think she gets an applause. She's very good in the army. And the question was, Noah, what was the question?
Tell us about the end of the war, how you met your family.
Okay. At the end of the war, I was freed by American parachutists. There was the famous Battle of Arnhem, where the Allied didn't succeed in crossing the Rhine, and therefore they extended the war for more than half a year. I was lucky and stayed in the part where the American parachutists took over. And so I was freed by American parachutists. Then after the war, my father was freed in the south of Holland, and he started an office for finding Jews who returned and who were looking for families. Somewhere I heard somewhere that he lives in the south of Holland, and I lived it with American cars, and so I joined my parents. My three brothers only joined after Holland was free in May 45. One brother also we found via the Red Cross at that time, and two of my brothers I knew more or less where they were hidden, and they had it very good. They didn't make any effort to get home, but finally after 1.5 months we found them and they got home.
A question? Yes.
I was wondering, so how come is it that the myth about Holland as a so-called safe harbor during the war was not out there earlier in time? It's only like the past 10 years that we're hearing more and more Jews, Holland Jews people are talking about it.
There are various reasons for this. One, he asked if the Jews were united after the war. In the war, yes, but after the war, certainly not. And I think that many of there were three reasons. One, the Dutch government did everything to show that they were also my parents. My father believed sincerely that the war was the Dutch, during the war, the Germans occupied the Dutch, and the Dutch had no guilt whatsoever, and Germans were guilty of everything. That was his belief. The second reason is that the whole history of the behavior of Dutch police and Dutch trains and so was not told. The third, as always, there are more reasons than one. The third reason is naturally the rightness. The people who saved Jews were all put on a high level, whereas the people who were betrayed and so on and were driven away, they were not mentioned. So all this together made a false impression. About a month ago, there was a publication by a researcher of the Dutch Red Cross. And it happens that the Dutch Red Cross during the war did nothing for the Jews, nothing. Whereas in Denmark and in Norway, they sent parcels to concentration camps, to Dutch people who were in concentration camps. The Dutch Red Cross did nothing. They cooperated with the Germans, and they did everything which should not have been done. Even they wouldn't take Jewish sick people to the hospital, nothing. I must say that today it's otherwise. The present directors of the Red Cross, they feel very bad about it. They are making now I'm talking about 2018. They make a special room in the Red Cross headquarters where they will show what they did wrong, and they promise that they will teach every new Red Cross volunteer in Holland what they did wrong during the war and how not to act in the war. But on the same time, they came here to ask excuse of the Jewish people, of the Dutch Jewish people. I didn't went there, as you can imagine, because there is no excuse, and they didn't want to do it in writing. And then they are very pro-Israeli because they have a budget for foreign assistance of 90 million euro, and therefore 60 million euro goes to Syria, to Gaza, and to the Western Bank, and to Israel doesn't go 1 penny. So you see, they are still very pro-Jews.
I understand that there's still a lot of anti-Semitism in Holland, even till this day. I'm not saying, I don't know where, but I've just heard stories. What do you think?
I follow regularly. There is anti-Semitism in Holland, no doubt. There was also anti-Semitism before the war. I only wanted to say my personal experience. I didn't feel it, but there was anti-Semitism. You know, some places where Jews couldn't get in, high society, and so on. Today there are accidents of anti-Semitism, mainly by Muslims, mainly by Moroccans who live in Holland. But it's less and less, and I must say that the Dutch government today and the Dutch municipalities do everything for keeping the Jews safe.
I'm not sorry, I just want to say that what I heard was nothing to do with Muslims or immigrants. This is Dutch people themselves.
I would love to agree with you, but it's not right. The Dutch people are today, I mean, there is anti-Semitism, but there are no anti-Semitism, I can say that for sure. There are no anti-Semitic acts in Holland as of today. When it comes mainly from Muslims and from Moroccans, and also, as you know, the anti-Muslim movement, who is the extreme right, who is very strong in Holland, who is the biggest party in Holland, is very pro-Israel and very pro-Jews. I don't think there might be some incident here or there, but as much as I know, and I talk with the leaders of the Dutch Jewish community till today, there is not such a problem in Holland.
Avraham, we all want to thank you very, very much for being with us tonight.
Thank you.
תודה רבה רבה. We know that you didn't really want to share your personal story with us, but everyone came to hear you. So we want to say thank you from Beit Hatfutsot and from Hillel for sharing and being with us tonight.
Thank you very much.
Also yours. And just want to let you know that also this video, also. We had, זאת נועה, לא נועה, זאת שירה. Shira's participating in G2G together, ושירה, כנראה שבזכותך סבא אברהם הסכים לבוא לספר לנו היום את הסיפור, אז כל הכבוד ותודה. And I just want to let you know that Shira was documenting Avram's story, and his story is on Beit Hatfutsot database, and also the video that was taken tonight of Avram's personal story is going to be on the database, so you can all look it up online and find it. And whoever wants to join the conversation and the workshop afterwards, we have volunteers here which can stand up.
I would like one word, may I?
Yes.
I just want to say, here you see in life why I love to live in Israel.
Thank you again very much. We're going to split into discussion groups. So the volunteers and Hillel students, whoever wants to join us, we're going to have discussion groups in English and Hebrew together, and we're just going to spread around. So if you just stand at the entrance of the door and grab whoever wants to come around with you. And thank you very much, whoever made the effort to come here today to Beit Hatfutsot. Have a good evening.